Hi, I'm Laura.
Hi, I'm Deanne.
Hi, and I'm Philippe.
Welcome to our Lyman book club, where we're reading The Ringed Castle by Dorothy Dunnett. And we are going to cover today part 3, chapters 1, 2, and 3. Dee is going to lead our discussion. Initial reactions you guys want to share before we dive in?
I was angry, but then I actually went online and looked up Richard Chancellor and realized that this actually happened to him. This is a historically accurate depiction of how he died. And I'm still angry, but I can't really blame Dorothy Dunnett for that, except for him including him in the book.
I was gonna say, I can 100% blame her. What are you talking about?
I mean,
yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm angry about it. I think I have hit the limit of, like, I'm just tired of reading this. Like, I'm tired of, and part of it is just, I think the pandemic is getting to me, even though we're all opening up again. Like, I'm kind of hitting this weird emotional place. And I'm not completely convinced I should have read this book. Like, I'm not convinced that I was at a point where after book 4, like, I was ready to quit after book 4 because it was just, I was like, that was heartbreaking in a really brutal way. And I was like, I don't know if I want to go on with this. I'm like, well, surely it's got to get better. And I'm just like, it's not better. And I think we talked about this before, where there's like no catharsis and there's no redemption. And I don't have confidence that there will be. And I think if I was not doing this book club, I would be done with this. Like, it's been too long since something nice has happened and something good has happened. And I understand that, like, I think Dunnett is bringing the readers along on a journey that Lyman is on, and he's in a really dark place. And so we're in a really dark place. But as a reader, it's too dark for me. Like, I'm not sure if it's my stage in life where I am, or what's happening in the world, or I just don't like this kind of story. Like, I mean, but I am really, really done with how dark this story is and how many people are dying. And, like, yes, this historical character really died, but it was the author's choice to put this character in the book. Like, it's not like it's a surprise that, oh my goodness, he died, I'm gonna have to talk about it in the story. Like, no, it was a choice to make us care about this character and then kill him. That was a choice the author made. And she's made that choice over and over and over. And I feel like the weight of characters who have died has far outstripped the number of characters who've had redemptive or healthy things happen to them. And I need a balance as a reader. Like, I really do. Because just as, like, for my soul, I cannot live in this place of horrible things happening all the time. It's just, and horrible things are happening in the world. Like, the news completely sucks. And yeah. So that's where I am.
I do think I think it's probably worse because we're reading it over an extended period of time, and so we're spending a lot of time in, like, these dark places. Like, the first time I read it, I basically just, like, zoomed through it so fast, so it didn't have this feeling of, like, being months in this sort of dark place. It was more like, I read Pawn and Frankincense and then I read Ring Castle in like 2 days. So it was like, okay, that was really dark, but, like, didn't last forever. I don't want to be too spoilery, so I'm going to be careful about what I say, but I will say, like, Dunnett is intentionally making you desperately want something good to happen, and she will pay it off eventually. because people wouldn't love this book so much if it was all just misery all the time.
It's certainly what it seems to be at the moment.
Yeah, I have faith in you. I do not have faith in this book. So that's, and I think really the only thing that's keeping me going in this is the fact that you love this series so much. And I trust you as my friend, and I trust your artistic sensibility. So like, I'm willing to say, okay, I will keep going. But if I had picked this up on my own, I actually probably would have quit earlier. I wouldn't have kept going. But it's just, yeah. Or I probably would have put it down and said, I'll get back to it later, and then just never got back to it later.
I think another thing about these specific chapters is, those first 2 chapters are so weighted in misery and awful things happening. And then you get this bright moment where Lyman and Richard reconnect. Yay! But it's a terrible conversation. Lyman just screws it up. And like, I really want to just slap him in the face as hard as I can. And like, I get what Dunnett's trying to do, and I almost understand why Lymond acts that way, which is, I think, something we'll unpack when we get to that part of our discussion. But I still just want to slap him really, really full force and tell him to get over it.
Oh,
I mean, he's not, obviously he's speaking out of trauma, and we'll talk about it later. And I think the expectation that he's going to have a completely healthy response after this shipwreck and all that is too high of an expectation. But he's a complete idiot and is not, like, is emotionally constipated and is not dealing with anything. And he hasn't been dealing with anything for years, like years. It's just, it's like, for an incredibly smart man, he is really, really dumb. And it's just, yeah.
Think about the trauma he's just gone through. Like, I don't want to get too into like the close analysis of the text, but there's so much about how vulnerable he is. Sorry. I think part of what's interesting in that conversation is like, okay, so he's just lost Chancellor, so he's in this deep mourning, and he's just had this revelation that Richard isn't his brother, so he thinks. So he's super traumatized by that. You can't stand on the computer, you're gonna mess up.
Yeah, I was trying to, while reading that chapter, trying to figure out whether Lymond just didn't believe in prophecy anymore and is like, oh, she was wrong, or if he really did believe in it and then realized, oh, well, Richard's probably not my brother because I believe so much. And it does reveal at the end that that's what it was, but I was trying to figure it out as I was reading.
No, there's that moment where he's like, he has this realization that Richard isn't his brother or whatever. But part of it, I think, is we've been saying, oh, think about how traumatized he is for 5 books. And I'm like, at some point that stops being an excuse, and you just have to be an adult and deal with your shit and stop with this. And it's like, I am losing patience with him because I'm starting to feel like his inability to deal with his emotional state no longer has excuses, because it's just gone on to, he is now 30. Like, and, it's like, deal with your shit. So
be a therapist.
I think that you're supposed to feel that way. Like, I think you're supposed to be a little frustrated by him, just like his men are frustrated by him. He's to the dark side, and there's not, like, there's a bunch of reasons, but it doesn't mean that it's okay. Yeah. But I think also in this moment, he's so traumatized by Chancellor's death and like the coming face to face with Richard and what that means in terms of the prophecy, that this isn't the moment for emotional maturity from him. But no. But also, I was trying to say before when my cat was being in pain. She's still being in pain. I think what's probably like one of the most interesting things about that scene is that Lymond kind of does try to reach out to Richard. He isn't fully able to do it because he talks about what happened to the other child. He actually, like, he brings it up. He's never talked about it to anyone else before. He would never bring it up to, even like
Yeah.
Alec. Like, part of him is trying to talk through that trauma. Like, this is the first time he's talking about that trauma. And even though it's not successful, he's not able to actually explain what happened. He keeps alluding to it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it's like, after everything he's been through and what a mess he is, he's not going to magically recover overnight, but it is like a first step, I think, to being able to talk about it at least and try to explain what's going on with him to someone, and his brother would be that person.
It's just ridiculous though, like, of all the people to open up with, like, Richard is the last person in his life that this is a good idea. Like, of course he's not going to pick up on it. Of course he's not going to figure out what Lyman is trying to say. Like, if anyone is less in touch with what's going on emotionally than Lyman, it's Richard. He just hasn't had the trauma.
You know what? It's like there's this part of him that's like with his big brother again, and it's just a completely different relationship than any other relationship in the book. And even though it's not the most healthy relationship, he's still little brother kind of telling big brother his pain, even though, again, it doesn't actually work in an effective way. But
and Richard just doesn't have, I think Richard loves Lyman. I just don't think he has the ability to perceive any of that. Like, he's just not a perceptive person, and he's very practical. He's very, concrete. He's just not an emotionally aware person.
And you can see how nervous he gets before he even meets up with Lyman again. He's like got his heart is pounding. He doesn't know how this meeting's going to go because things have a way of going really wrong whenever he talks to his brother.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and he's so worried about their mother and what Lyman's going to do with the rest of the family.
Yeah, that's one of the things I'm the most upset about Lyman for, is how he dismisses Sibylla outright during the conversation and just doesn't even, he just moves the topic right along. I was like, you couldn't spend a couple more moments asking about how your mother is? Are you that angry after this prophecy has been revealed, even though you don't know what the truth actually is yet?
Yeah. Okay, let's focus on the chapters and we'll get there when we get there.
Sure.
Clearly, that's part of the book we want to talk about. So looking at chapter 1, part 3, chapter 1, we're going to break it into 2 parts. The first part is this sort of getting ready to sail. The passengers are joining the ships. Lyman and Chancellor kind of they have a discussion about this trip. And then a bunch of the men discuss Lyman. So let's talk about those kind of conversations, and then we'll move on to the second part, which is going to be this like ominous weather sailing part. So,
well, right out the gate, it's very sort of foretelling. The very first line, on her 6th and last voyage through the frozen sea, which could mean, this ship is going to be decommissioned and never used again. But that immediately set the tone. I was like, oh no, what's going to happen?
Yeah, she does a really good job of creating this sense of dread. And she also mentions later it's the same month in which the small fleet of humanity had been scattered. So you just get this they're following in the footsteps of these ghost ships.
Yeah. Well, literally with the ghost ships.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's foreshadowed as well that those ships don't make it before that happens. Because I think at one point it says, it was nobody's blame. I'm paraphrasing. I don't remember exactly where it is on the page. But she basically says these ships aren't going to make it either. But at least the Edward Bonaventure almost makes it to Scotland in a way.
Yeah, it's kind of the implication, nobody made a mistake. It just, bad things happened.
And the weather was not on their side.
Yeah.
I mean, I think because she's very invested in Chancellor's greatness, she can't portray it as his fault. So so it has to be not his fault, which, I mean, who knows what the reality was, but she's probably right. I think it's interesting. I like the way that Adam reacts. when they find out that Lymond is coming, he says, "Thank heaven."
Yeah.
And Harcourt says, "Amen to that."
Mhm.
And one of the things I want to talk to you guys about is Harcourt, because you're quite suspicious of him. But it's, from what happens in these chapters, did that change your mind at all, or are you still suspicious?
I'm still a little bit suspicious, but his behaviors in these chapters really sort of had me confused, because I was like, oh shit, I could be wrong.
Yeah, because he seemed to work really hard to save Lyman's life. So it seems like if his purpose was assassination, he could have just done nothing and Lyman would have died in a couple of places. So,
but then I also thought about it this way: if he is working for the Lennoxes, his job was to kill Lymond if Lymond didn't come back. But now that Lymond is coming back, he's probably still doing his job to keep him alive for Margaret Lennox.
maybe.
So that's a possibility if I'm still believing that Ludovic is our man, which I don't know. But I kind of trust Danny Hislop more now too, through his behaviors in these chapters as well. So everybody does their best and is their most heroic as trying to save as many lives as possible.
Yeah. I liked the idea of de Harcourt being a bad guy, mainly because I kind of liked the idea of like Gabriel's fingers reaching into this book, just that I liked that idea of like, even though he's gone, he's still like acting as a villain in some way. And so I sort of like the idea of de Harcourt as an agent of Gabriel from the Knights of St. Malta. But if his purpose was like revenge for the death of a supposed hero or something, then that doesn't work anymore. So, yeah.
I mean, there is a line on page 374. Surely not, said Ludovic de Harcourt. The Voivoda has been in Malta. I believe he has even fought for the knights. And he's saying it with clear, like, derision and sarcasm in his head. So that was like, maybe I am right. But then, I don't know.
Yeah, but he also said it very clearly in front of Lyman, because Lyman immediately says, de Harcourt is not, like, he immediately says, if you follow de Harcourt's tone instead of his words, you'll gather I did not fight for the knight. So, like, he said that in front of Lyman with no, like, not obscuring his intent at all. So, yeah. So, I don't know.
Doesn't mean he's just critical of Lyman's behavior.
Right. Yeah. I still think for the purposes of the plot and the way Dunnett works as a writer, that it's going to be somebody that's been close to Lyman this whole time.
Yeah, I just don't think it's going to be random. I sort of think that because for the same reason that I don't think his father is some random person. Like, I just don't think, I think it's somebody we know, which is a limited pool of people. So, yeah.
I think one of the other interesting things that kind of runs throughout these chapters, but this section in particular, is Christopher's changing opinion of Lyman and his deepening relationship with Chancellor. So with Christopher, he had sort of fanboyed him and then became very horrified by him after the thing with Adam. And now he's sort of horrified by him still. Like, he doesn't want to share his cabin with Lyman, it mentions. But he ends up warming up to him more. And there's a bit later where Lyman is like helping teach him.
Yeah.
They're sort of improving their relationship. And then there's a lot about Lyman kind of studying and learning from Chancellor, which I think is interesting because, it's like the only time we see him, like the less powerful, less capable, less competent one in a relationship. He's learning from someone else. And he's really like interested in it. And, of course it just makes it more sad what happens, but
although I like that he got frustrated with it, that he's like, I'm never going to get this, and it was kind of fun to see him like not conquer something immediately and be like seeking this knowledge and really struggling to gain it.
And cool. It super emphasizes what a like amazing person Chancellor is, that he's so on the cutting edge of, his age and the bounds of knowledge of that era.
Yeah, I very much enjoyed seeing Lyman as the student for once.
Mm-hmm.
So let's
also, I think it's in this chapter, but apologies if I'm skipping ahead. Sort of the revelation that the reason Lyman chooses to sleep alone is because he talks in his sleep so much. I mean, we've seen it happen before, but it never crossed my mind that that's one of the reasons why he doesn't want anyone around him.
Yep. It's like, oh, finally we get these explanations of things that have been going on throughout the book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's that, and he also implies that the reason he talks in his sleep is because of the opium addiction, like it's one of the after effects.
Yeah.
But then we also get the reveals, like when they're talking about him on 375. We get the reveal that he stayed with Adam after playing chess with the Tsar. He stayed with Adam all night, except when he was being sick. And according to Guthrie, he was sick because he had been playing chess. So Lyman, who's been so cold and like inhuman, actually having these same human reactions that we would expect him to be having.
Yeah. Yeah, I also sort of thought this was funny. There's this whole bit where Danny Hislop is talking, and he says, we talked about our reasons for staying in Russia. No one gave the correct one. You can hate a man and stay in his company because of his sheer God-given, irresistible powers to stimulate, which I thought that was an interesting like commentary on Lyman. And then of course, Adam jumps in. He says, you're all trailing through, I thought you were all trailing through Europe because you were enamored of him. It wasn't that in the least. We loved his mind, said Alan Blacklock with a sudden terrible bitterness. And then, so then he gets up. And I think the implication is that, yeah, he gets up and he leaves. I mean, it says it in the text. And then Danny Hislop refers to himself and just says, Danny Hislop, you're a bloody fool. And I just kind of liked that, like, I'm of two minds about Danny Hislop, but I do like the way he talks. And I like the way that yeah.
He gives a spark of entertainment to like a book with a lot of very kind of dour and humorless characters.
Yeah.
What exactly is it that he said that upset Adam?
Well, I think it was that he's like giving the wrong reasons for why they are following Lyman, and then Adam is just like says like we loved his mind, and then walks out of the room. But yeah, something in what he says set off Adam.
I think it's also just the sensitivity of like how loyal they were and how much they cared, because then they talk after about how Lyman helped him when he had the drug problem in Scotland. So this isn't a theoretical thing. Like the way Danny is with Lyman, it's all very like, he's entertaining, he's interesting, but Adam has like it's much more emotional connection because Lyman was there for him in one of the hardest parts of his life.
Yeah.
Right. I also kind of wonder too if like Danny's making a joke about, like, Danny's trying to be funny about how, oh, I thought you were all enamored with him and that's why you were falling, like, I thought you all were in love with him and that's why you're following him around. And then Adam, who does have, I think Adam does love Lyman, like, not necessarily romantically, but like is deeply cares for this man for good reason. It's just like kind of stands out, it's like we loved his mind and walks out of the room. And then Danny's like, I think as many people who are kind of make jokes in serious situations, Danny's like, crap, I shouldn't have made that joke, or I shouldn't have made light of that.
Because this has emotional meaning to others that it doesn't have to him. I think it's also interesting, they sort of like uncover parts of Lyman that a number of them didn't know about, and I like how it starts with Danny speculating about how Chancellor is just humoring Lyman and like, why are they lying to themselves? And then he revealed that Lyman, because Danny's thinking, he was a galley slave, right?
Yeah.
But before that, he got a Bachelor of Arts of Paris University.
I love Robert Best just speaking up from like across the room, going like, "What?" Yeah.
And like, oh, okay, there's just a whole other part to this person that we don't know about, which also like just super emphasizes how much Lyman just shut down the side of him that we find most likable, because these guys have been hanging out with him for like over a year and they have no idea.
Yeah.
I really like how sort of the relationship between Lymond and Adam is, again, it's been muddied because of what happened, but here we see that Adam bears no more grudge against it. And I almost feel like when he expresses his relief that Lymond is coming back to England with them, that he's glad that Lymond is leaving Russia, almost like Alec Guthrie. Like, I think he's feeling the same way as Alec did. And that's why he's so relieved that Lymond is coming back with him.
Yeah, definitely.
Like,
yeah,
maybe Lyman will return to the way he used to be after he gets out of Russia.
Yeah, I think all the guys who know him well are like, he's got to get out of Russia. I mean,
they want to save his soul, basically, from the sort of dark side that he's falling into. I want to talk a little bit about the parallels with the Untamed, but it's even more when in the confrontation with Richard, where like in the Untamed, which I love for like almost the same reasons I love Lyman, the hero goes through this horrible traumatic experience and then he comes back different, and he's sort of like hovering between like being a good person again, but like so traumatized and also like really dark.
and his brother does not help.
His brother does not help.
Not at all.
His brother's like is like so similar to Richard. It's amazing how similar they are.
It's really true.
But just like this idea of like his friends watching him being like, what's wrong with him? He's different, and not knowing because they don't know what he's been through, and the way that like the confrontation with Richard plays out just like the confrontation with Lan Wangji and Wei Wuxian when he comes back from the burial mounds, and it's like, you as the audience member are like, he's so traumatized, I want someone to comfort him, but he's got all his like hackles up like in like as a defense mechanism, and instead he just pushes people away, and you're like, no, that's the opposite of what I wanted.
I'm going to draw a line in the sand. If this book series does not have a scene that is somehow comparable to the Lan Wangji Wei Wuxian and the bridge with Winning like confronting his brother, if we do not have that scene in this book, I'm going to be so annoyed. Because that was such a cathartic, like redemptive scene when people who deeply cared about Wei Wuxian were like, oh, that's what happened to him. And like there was this dawning of the trauma that he experienced. So I need that in this book.
And I'm going to draw a line if Lyman doesn't end up in a jail cell with a demon wolf. That's just, we need that to happen.
No.
There are not any demon wolves. Remember, they're jail cells.
I'm just kidding.
But yeah, okay. So then also I just kind of going back to this chapter and this section is like right after that on 376. To stay would harm St. Mary's or the Vovoda, for whom living, as you have seen, is an exact science to be pursued with the brain. And we get like, you know, we always have these like Lymond as a mechanical being metaphors throughout the whole series, and it's like super in this chapter, like he's like completely shut down his emotional side, and like when we're in his point of view, he's like drowning trying to save Chancellor, obviously with tons of emotions brewing underneath because he so desperately wants to save Chancellor, and yet the way his brain is functioning is like, it would be logical to keep swimming. Okay, now it's logical to not swim anymore. I guess I'll stop swimming. Like, you know, just really mechanical and logical and intellectual in his thinking. And all of his friends are also just like, this is not a healthy way for a person to live. This is like shutting down, you know, your human side, basically.
Yeah. And then this de Harcourt saying, like, I think you might come to forget too that life is more than a science. So he's saying like, you're too close to Lyman, and then Danny is like, dispute it with him. He's not immutable. I just think, really, is he going to respond to argument? I don't know. But then no man can be. I'm here because I find in him a reason for thinking, and at present I want to think and not, like Adam, to feel. Which, and then he says, does fog induce the confessional atmosphere Ludo divides their penance? So that comment, actually almost more than anything else that we've seen from Danny, makes me intrigued with Danny's backstory, because he's like, I want to think, I don't want to feel. And I'm guessing maybe it's because the woman that, like, he's sad because he lost, didn't he lose his woman or something? Like, there was this very brief mention to the fact that he's going because.
Yeah, she left him because she didn't want to change her religion or something.
Yeah, something like that. Okay. So, like, maybe that's what's going on. And he's, like, sad because he lost in his romantic endeavors. And so now he just wants to, like, not feel for things, maybe. But I'm wondering if maybe, is there something more to that? I don't know. It made me a little bit more intrigued with Danny than I was before.
When it says, so on 377, and so there unrolled before them, although only one of them recognized it, the slow and terrible course they were to follow. Who is the one?
Oh, I underlined that.
Is it Lymond? Is it Chancellor?
I mean,
I would assume it's Chancellor, just because he's made this voyage before and he can read the weather and know that, this is not going to be an easy trip. Like, I don't think he sees the voyage ahead of him and sees, oh, this is going to end up with me and most of my men dying, but
yeah,
I think he tells it's going to be a particularly difficult passing.
Like, are we talking the metaphorical course they're going to travel, which is they're going to have a huge disaster? Or are we talking the literal course they're going to follow? Like, because if it's the literal course they're going to follow, then obviously it's Chancellor. He's the only one who can get them where they're going. If it's the metaphorical course they're going to follow, then the question is, like, does Lyman anticipate disaster but goes along with it anyway? Is he, I think there's several, I mean, there's obviously lots of mentions to the fact that Lyman is passively suicidal. Like, he's not actively suicidal, but I don't think death is somewhat welcoming to him at this point. And so, if he sees disaster, is he trying that hard to avoid it? Although I don't think that Lyman would, if he did see, like, if he did have an actual sense that this is going to be utter disaster, I think Lyman still cares enough about the people around him that he wouldn't, like, go blithely off into, like, let's kill everyone that goes on the trip, so.
Yeah, for sure. I actually hadn't thought about it being the literal course, but you're right. Like, if it's the literal course, slow and terrible as it may be, then that would be Chancellor for sure.
And he's the only one, which.
Yeah. And obviously, like, I mean, Lyman can't control nature and life and death. So, he's going to be on this trip no matter what. But I do think it's interesting. So right after that, it's at the top of 378. It says, because death was a friend, the one man who was made to receive like a tuning fork, the whispering omens of fate, did not recognize it until too late.
And that, I think, is Lyman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, that's like one of those places where Dunnett crosses over into the supernatural. And I'm like, really? Okay.
I mean, I was a little curious about this as well, because it's like, have we seen Lyman? Like, is there a history of him, like, saying, like, I have a bad omen about this, so I'm not going to do it? Is there?
I think it's more, I take it more as like the Dame de Dutante was able to psychically talk to him and read his mind. So he's like more open to the sort of mystical future prediction stuff.
But we haven't seen him do that, have we? Like, I don't remember.
We haven't seen him initiate it. We've seen him like respond to it, I guess.
Yeah, like he's
also
prophecy, but I don't remember at least any instance where he sort of got a bad feeling about something and then.
No, you're right. I mean, I also think he does believe in the prophecies, because he takes obviously the one about never seeing Richard again very seriously.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering, and we may have had this discussion before, especially back in the beginning of Pawn when he got this prophecy, but why does Lyman take so much stock in these prophecies? Why is he so willing to believe them outright? I mean, I know on the basic level, like even during the prophecy, he's like, oh, everything she's saying is just bull, don't listen to her. But that's clearly not how he really feels.
I think it's a combination of, in the era, these things were taken much more seriously. And like, you know, sort of science and magic were two sides of the same coin. Like alchemy led to chemistry, and astrology and astronomy were practically the same thing. But yeah, I think also maybe it's because prophecies have come true. Like her prophecies in the past have played out, and she did read his mind. I mean, that's a pretty good like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is interesting though, because it's so in contrast to the whole thing with what's his name, Johnny Bolo in Game of Kings, where
God, I forgot
like,
about him.
the charlatan. It's very obvious. It's funny. You know, you don't take it seriously, and then in these, it's like, oh no, now it's serious.
True.
Speaking of just the foreshadowing and the way that she writes, I think it's just really beautiful. Also at the top of 378, where she writes about the two ghost ships of Willoughby riding silently with them, who had been this way before and had been lost in it and were to be lost again, not to rise.
Yeah.
Just so eerie. This whole thing is so eerie.
So you know those ships are gonna sink. Like once you read that, you're like, okay, so those ships are definitely gonna sink on this voyage. Like they're not gonna rise. They're gonna sink and not rise again. So yeah. So I was not surprised at the end of this chapter when the other three ships sank. Like I was not surprised, but I thought it was smart of Dunnett because it sort of enabled her to like have her cake and eat it too, kind of in the sense that she was able to do all this dark, ominous, beautiful foreshadowing, but also give like a false payoff for it. So all the ships sank, and so it's easy to go, oh, the shit, oh, that was like all this anonymous, this ominous foreshadowing, and they lost 3 of the 4 ships. Like, okay, and of course not.
Yeah. She like just sort of keeps it open for you to hope. Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna slap myself on the wrist for not catching this. We should have known all the ships were gonna sink because there were live animals on them.
Oh, right, that's true. Very good point.
No animals are allowed to live in a Dunnett book.
4 sables and the Falcon. Is that what it's called?
Something.
Yeah.
As far as I know, all that stuff is like historically accurate from the real logs of the ship, including the.
I did love this one moment on 379 where you again just get this sense of how, even in the midst of all this emotional coldness, Lyman is still taking care of the men on the ship, and how there's this thing, it's this fear was their great enemy. Buckland was everywhere, and Chancellor, when he could leave the deck, also below decks, working with them and talking to the seamen. For this time, they had no minister with them. So these guys are acting as like the chaplain kind of, and trying to, help the men through their fear. And it says, often they found Lyman had been there before them. And so it's just this like little comment that shows how he was regularly like trying to emotionally care for the men on the ship, even with his own emotional state not great. So
yeah, because he knows in order to lead men, in order to prevent mutiny, in order to keep everybody going, the morale has to be at a certain level, and he does it in a way. It's like very mechanical, like he's doing it because it has to be done, but he's also really good at it.
Yeah,
I think it's also interesting. Like, I think this whole section is also interesting because it's like Lyman sailing away from Russia back towards Scotland, slowly becoming human again. He's not, Mr. Voivoda too badass to do anything. He immediately like starts helping. He becomes one of the team that helps run the ship. And we just get over like the course of these 2 chapters, we get more references to him as Francis Crawford. We get the sort of open, honest conversations with Chancellor more and more, like the very emotional moment near the end. And just like, he just starts to become like one of the men, and he's as, damaged as the rest of them with the terrible food and the rough weather and all this stuff. And like, it's just like, how do I say? he's been through this horrible trauma. He's now starting to recover, but it's not like an easy up road. It's like a very bumpy road, but it's happening finally.
I also like how you get more of an insight of how the Men of St. Mary's feel about him as their commander, which we didn't really get before.
Yeah, I feel like all the stuff that we were like wondering about, like it's suddenly out in the open in these chapters.
I do kind of like the contrast that Chancellor gives at the bottom of 380, where he's comparing Lyman to Master Cabot, and it says he was a good man, not a mathematician, but a good man whom Dia taught as well, not like the man he'd found here, whose first name he could not even use, and whose mind was like the star over their heads. Which I love that he's like, Lyman's not a good man. Like he's good, which is true. Like he's definitely super flawed. And then, but just that image of like his mind was a star over their heads, which is obviously a reference to like a guiding star or a navigation star, which was cool.
Well, an interesting contrast to him saying he doesn't have a guiding star of his own. We also have just on 378, we have Lyman spending time with Christopher and showing him things in the sea. Which is just like, one, it's kind of there to make it hurt more, but two, it's like Lyman has always been good with kids. He still can't quite help himself.
Yeah.
And Christopher's older than I thought. Sorry, because we get the reveal that he's the same age as Philippa, so he's 19 here.
Yeah, but we also see again how Lyman totally underestimates the age of Philippa. Like he did as his child. So.
And he even like admits he's like, hey, I knew her as a kid, so I think of her as a kid. But like, if you're into her, that's great.
Yeah. By the way, she's not a kid anymore.
That's interesting when Richard Chancellor comes out and is like, the only woman that I've found since, my Eleanor, I forget his original wife's name, is your wife, basically. It's like, you're married to her now. So, I mean, we did get that before, but it's interesting that he would admit that to Lymond.
Well, and I think it's just amazing that Lyman's just astonished by it. Like he doesn't think of her that way. And it's like, oh. Like maybe there's something to Philippa that this amazing man is like so into her.
Right, that you kind of wonder if it was somewhat of an epiphany moment for Lyman, because this man that he respects so much, like intellectually and with his curiosity and everything, he respects Chancellor so much, and Chancellor really likes his wife.
Like she's not just a kid anymore.
Yeah. Then we get all these descriptions of sailing. I don't know if you want to go into them. There's some cool stuff about like how wonderful Chancellor is. Like he's the supreme man on the sea, and they're working together, and like it's incredibly difficult. And Buckland is beside him, and Lyman is beside him. And in fact, it says like on the other side of him, like a rock, is Francis Crawford.
We get him the supreme man of his time on the sea.
Yeah,
which is probably a real quote from the real Henry Sidney. Also, I think interesting that Lyman is like Mr. one of the team willing to do anything, but he won't help take care of the bird.
Yeah,
because he's traumatized by losing his eagle, because he really did love the eagle.
Right after that, you get the paragraph mid 379 that lists basically what they're bringing on the ship. And I really love how Dunnett uses this as a framing device to show you the beginning of the journey. And then at the end on page 400, she lists the exact same things, basically word for word, but in a completely different state. And that really kind of hit home to me. I was like, oh God.
Yeah.
It's a very simple device, but she does it so effectively.
I agree.
Yep.
I will confess that like I don't really care about Dick and Chancellor. I didn't cry when I read this, but she writes it in such a beautiful way that it like hits your emotions anyway.
Yeah. I think I was more sad when he died in the book. I mean, I was sad because like this description of like Christopher sliding off the ship and then him going after him, like, it was really sad. But also, I was just sad for the world, because like you get the sense that this guy could have done all these amazing things. It was like at the beginning of his like astounding journeys in the world, and he was a decent guy, and you know, it's just, yeah.
I think it's an interesting contrast between like this sort of amazing promise that's lost, right? And like all the work that they did, we spent bazillions of pages reading about them negotiating for the price of blah blah blah, and then it's all at the, you know, in the ocean anyway. It didn't matter, it didn't mean anything. But then Lyman and Chancellor have that conversation about how like every little bit that a person does to contribute to like the world and like the next steps of humanity, like everything matters, even if you didn't fully achieve what you were trying to achieve. Like you what you did still made a difference. And so there's this feeling with Chancellor, like he had this like great unrealized potential, and it's terrible that it wasn't realized, but he also still made a amazing impact and like laid some of the groundwork that then the next people and the next people, the next people built on.
Yeah.
I'm sad that he never got to take his journey and discover what's beyond the River Ob.
Yeah.
When Lyman was going to fund him, and he was going to discover, or not discover, but he was going to explore China.
Yeah.
So also just kind of like the way that Lyman is human again. On 383, we have Lyman having fallen asleep on Christopher's bed. And we get the description, Francis Crawford was asleep for once dreamlessly. And then this whole description of how, you know, they're all wearing the same clothes that they've worn for months, and they're dirty and unshaven and undernourished and fatigued. And Chancellor kind of gently wakes him up, and it's like in this scene they're just two human people, like Lyman is Francis Crawford. And then this is, I think, I don't remember where it is. There's a point where like Chancellor starts to break down, and they again have like a very human exchange and a very human relationship.
Yeah, there's this bit where the end of the chapter where Chancellor cries for the ships that he lost and the men that he lost, which you get the feeling for him that it's more about the crewmen than it is about the objects.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
Which is, you know, just makes you like him more. But it just says he wept that night, but not again. You know, and so you just get the sense that he just allows himself like one night to be sad, and then it's like, okay, move forward. You know, you've got 50 men who are alive, and we got to get them through. So yeah,
so it's interesting. Like Chancellor is very like Lymond in that way, where he does what needs to be done, and he's super competent. And there's a line on 386. About Chancellor navigating, and it says he drove her between the islands as he had once envied another man in his element, swift and hard and firm on the reins. So this is Chancellor being what he had envied in Lymond, but like in Chancellor's realm of expertise, he is as competent as Lymond is. And I feel like we see it explicitly here, because I think part of it was like when we were in Chancellor's point of view before, he didn't really get Lyman, he didn't really get what's going on. So he was another one of those characters that are looking at Lyman from like a sort of very partial point of view. But then here we see him in his element, and we're like, oh, like this guy is, you know, amazing in his own right and equal to Lyman for sure.
Yeah. And that's the end of chapter 1. So chapter 2, they find Scotland. They don't arrive yet, but they find Scotland. And then Chancellor and Lyman have this talk, this really good talk. And then we can pause. And then the second part is just the ship sinking and everybody dying.
So we get Lyman's birth year and birth month. We could sort of extrapolate the year before, but anyway, now we know for sure that he was born in November of 1526, because he has been 29 and just turned 30 in November. And we have the date.
Welcome to your 30s.
Yay.
Yeah. Also, I think I sort of wonder if part of what inspired Dunnett to put this in the book is the fact that these English explorers who went to Russia ended up shipwrecked in Scotland, which is a true historical fact. Because like when you're reading it as like just as a reader and not knowing it's all true, I'm like, at least for me, the first time I didn't know it was all true, I was like, that's awfully a stretch that they crash in Scotland. And then it's like, oh, that really happened.
Mm.
And yeah, and it's funny that just like Lyman so intensely was trying not to go to Scotland, and it's like, no, there's no way, dude, you can't prevent it. And you know, he's like, I'm not going to go back at all. Okay, well, I'm going to go back to England, but not Scotland. Okay, well, we're going to land here, but I'm not going to get on the land.
Yeah.
Like, no, fate is making you get on that land and go see your brother.
Yeah, that's true.
I also just wanted to mention on the first page of this chapter, as they're looking at the landscape, the outline of a fair-sized keep on the skyline and a modest handful of bothies. We had a conversation last night about what a bothy is.
We did.
I underlined that word because it's like, I learned that word yesterday.
Me too.
If you're ever in New York City, go in the wintertime, go to a bar called The Lodge, which is a bar themed after a Scottish bothy. Which is a word we learned there last night.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, I think we get another sign, because you've been talking about like Lyman's humanity coming back. I think we get a really, really clear sign of that on 388 when he tells Chancellor, he just says, I can listen, which was clearly just permission for Chancellor to break down that he needed. And he does. And yeah, he just says, I know, I can listen. And I think that that's just a sign of his.
And they're all so worn down. And we have Lyman's like dropping on the chest beside him, you know, putting his hands on the table, resting his head. Like, so they're all exhausted. And like all Lyman's like protective mechanisms have sort of come down, and it's just the two of them as people. Which is like, yes, it's there to rub it in and make it hurt more when Chancellor dies, but it's also there to show Lyman in a much better light than we've seen him in this book, and just show him like finally kind of able to act human with another person. And the fact that he's comforting another person is also interesting, because so much of his vulnerability before has been him like needing to be comforted, and here he's like being there for someone else.
Even though his comfort is still a little bit like, it's still a little harsh, because he's kind of like, yeah, if you're gonna leave, people are gonna die. So he kind of says like, I stopped counting the dead people, which I actually don't think is true. I think he's still like, maybe he doesn't count them, but he's still like, they prey on his mind still, obviously. But this last sentence of that section, or that paragraph where he says, I stopped counting, he just says, you lead, therefore you kill. Like, oh, but so he's trying to be comforting, but kind of.
But I think it's interesting because it's like they're being able to have this conversation as equals in a way that like there's almost no one else that they can have that kind of conversation with in the world.
Yeah.
And yeah, for sure, Lymond is still hurt by the people that die because of him. I mean, and this kind of goes back to the question that I think sort of runs throughout like a bunch of the books, which is like, why is he trying to be a mercenary when he's like way better as like an artist and musician who plays with children?
Yeah. Especially because he doesn't have to be a mercenary. Like, he could absolutely go home and like write poetry and live off his mother. And
yeah, but I mean, like, I think he partly feels that he has like an obligation to make the world a better place, like to act in the world, right? Because in Queen's Play, he was just like, I'm just gonna, mess around and have fun. And then Liam was like, no, he basically was like, I'm gonna become an Liam, and Liam was like, no, you need to make a difference in the world.
But it's really interesting that for some reason, Lyman translates you should make a difference in the world into military action, as opposed to becoming a poet or becoming a great musician, and he knows that people like that make a difference because he's educated. And so it's just interesting that there's some sort of disconnect between like his skills and where he actually finds joy and what he thinks can make a difference in the world.
I think that he thinks he has to make a difference in the political realm, and because he's not the heir, he's not Richard, he's not born into that, he has to earn that, and the way you earn that is through warfare, which is exactly what he's doing in Russia. He's like, well, I'll run the army because then we'll be able to like make schools. And
yeah, I was going to bring up Russia as the example. Like he really does want to make a change for the better for the people of Russia, but in order to do so, he needs to make sure that, you know, the armies know what they're doing, so Russia isn't completely conquered.
But I'm a little bit skeptical of that as well, because we have evidence of him, like he could absolutely be a political player without having an army, like 100%, because we see him do it. Like we see him like, there's no way that he would not be welcomed at multiple courts in being a political player. And he doesn't want to be under someone's control, but then he becomes under people's control. So it's like, I feel like the whole thing is just Lyman avoiding what he's trying to do. Like, it's just all of these excuses for why he can't do the things that bring him joy. Like, I think there's some element of self-punishment in all of this, because it's not, he could make a difference politically without an army, because he did. Like, it's not, yeah.
I agree with the self-punishment, but I'm not sure that he's ever really found a way to make a difference without an army. Because in every book, it's always like he either has an army that he's acting through, and that's what gives him negotiating power, or he doesn't have an army, and a bunch of people are trying to buy and sell him. And he kind of doesn't get taken seriously a lot of the time when he doesn't have an army. So, like, I think he's still trying to find the right way in.
Yeah, maybe. But I feel like the Dowager Queen definitely took him seriously without an army.
Yeah, but she wanted to buy him and control him.
Well, sure, but that doesn't mean like she's the only, I mean, like, that doesn't mean that option didn't exist for him or that he couldn't see it. It's just,
no, he saw it and like explicitly refused it, because he was like, I don't want to be controlled by you. I don't think the De Guise interest is in the interest of Scotland.
Right. So, but my point is, he has the skills to do that, and those skills were seen by people in power. So he does have the ability to impact politics because he's a strategist, and that's what was being valued. So Marie de Guise wanted him as a strategist and as an advisor. So he's got skills in that way, and those were recognized by people in power. But he still's like, I gotta have an army.
But she explicitly didn't want him in like the inner circle advising. She wanted him to like be her tool. Like, having an army is the only way he can act independently in what he thinks is the best interest, rather than having to do what some monarch says or some powerful person.
I don't know. I think the logic is so flawed, because then it's like he's still just doing what the monarchs say, because they're the ones who.
I don't think he's doing it well or right with Ivan. Like, I think he's completely lost himself with Ivan, and that's what his men are seeing as well. Like, he used to be acting with integrity in the interest of the greater good, and now like he's telling himself he's doing that, but like we're all kind of like, no, he's not.
Yeah. No. And also, it's always confused me, this whole like, I can be independent with a mercenary gang, because it's like, you just get hired. Like, you just go where people tell you to, because you get hired by people, and you can choose who you work for, but you're never independent. Like, you're always going to be doing something else.
You can always say no, and you can save up your money and then like do your own things. Like, I think it is legitimate in the world that they live in. There's not that many ways for someone who isn't like having hereditary power to have power. I think the part that would be interesting is like when you see someone like Henry Sidney, and it's like, well, why don't you try to be that? And he kind of does when he offers to fund Chancellor, but then that falls apart.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I think there are models for him to be powerful in a different way. He just keeps choosing war, and
it's what he knows. It's what he's good at.
Yeah.
It's the world he lives in. I mean, I think he's still trying to figure it out. I mean, he's only 30.
He's only 30. That's true.
Um,
Which I wrote down at the bottom of 389.
Oh, so then we get the bit about how he's been talking in his sleep, and Chancellor's face when he reveals that he was an opium addict, which I assume is like judgmental.
Yeah.
There's an interesting, so they're talking a lot about John Dee, and Lyman has been exchanging. Chancellor wants Lyman to like study with him, and Lyman actually reveals that he's never met him, but he has been exchanging letters with him. And he says, I have told him I shall take no part in the thing he wishes me to meddle with. So we get this reveal that John Dee wants Lyman to meddle with something, but we don't know what it is. Even though I've read this a million times, I don't think I ever paid attention to that before, but I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, I was curious. But
yeah. What could it be? I don't know enough about John Dee, so.
He invented Enochian, the language of angels, and he's a famous advisor to Queen Elizabeth.
Yeah, I mean, I know who he is, but I just don't know enough about him to like, what could it be that it's something to do with Elizabeth and Mary? Like, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta assume, right, something like that. And he's, I think, skating on like the bounds of being considered a heretic. And he's one of those people who's like the epitome of magic and science being the same thing, because he's like a cutting edge scientist, but also total magician.
Super into magic.
And so then we get to talk about Philippa, and I just love the an astonishment so unexpected, so vivid. And you know, he thinks like Lyman is sort of like looking down on Philippa, and it's like he's not. He just never thought of her that way. He just doesn't,
right.
You know, just process her as anything other than like a 12-year-old.
Yeah. And I also like that he kind of he doesn't want Chancellor to think that he thinks badly of Philippa. So he's like, no, I'm sorry, you have the wrong impression entirely.
Yeah, there are no two people I can imagine who would suit each other better. Yeah. I think of her as a child because I knew her as a child. At least he admits it.
Yeah. But she is old for her age. Yeah. And Chancellor's kind of like, she likes you, dude. He's like, she's concerned for your future.
Yeah, and then he says she's concerned for her dog and her cat. It is a Somerville failing.
Right. Which I kind of felt like was Lyman just saying like Kate and Philippa sort of adopt people like pets and try to take care of them, which is kind of true.
No, it is. And I think, I mean, obviously we don't know exactly how, like, what's in Philippa's mind. I don't think Philippa knows, but like Lyman is definitely seeing it as they're just like super nice people that help me because like I'm like a lost soul pet kind of thing to them.
Yeah.
Because it's sort of like an implication from Chancellor that she's cares about Lyman, you know, more than would be appropriate. And
I just realized while we're talking about this and Philippa that one of the few things that got saved from the wreckage is Chancellor's chest, and in that chest is Philippa's letter, so it's still out there in the world.
Yeah.
It didn't go down with the ship.
That is a very good point.
Ticking time bomb.
And then we get this section that you mentioned already, Laura, on 391 about how we add something. If we didn't add something, there would be no object in it. It just that whole like out of every bloody fruitless endeavor, like something comes out of the voyage. That
this striving after the unknowable, the unattainable, the creative force. So the idea of like you can never truly get there, but it's worth the journey.
Yeah. The destination is not the point. The journey is the point.
Yeah. Which is like the whole metaphor of Chancellor's life.
Yeah. And then they fall asleep right after Chancellor says, they're talking about the wind, and Lyman just says he wants the wind to stop howling in a minor key. Okay, we should try a major key, which is happier. And then Chancellor says, wind is a melancholy creature, and then they fall asleep. And then disaster ensues. I did not underline very much in this the ship sinking part, because I just was reading through it, like just yeah. But
I think interesting is so what they think is happening is that Chancellor's getting away and Lymond isn't. This is
right.
Because Chancellor gets on the boat with Nepeja.
Yeah.
And he has horror and despair on his face, looking at Lyman, thinking Lyman's being left behind. And he says, I have lost you before I have found you.
Yeah.
Which I love it, and I think it's beautiful. And it kind of goes with how, earlier we saw Lyman as this mistreated chancellor, and we've seen him uncovering the mystery, but he has obviously not fully gotten there, and now he never will.
Yeah.
It's also interesting and pretty on point that Lyman is willing to go down with the ship until he sees the boat that everybody else is on capsize.
Yeah, well, yeah, you talked about him being passively suicidal, and he totally is throughout the whole thing, which is another Wei Wuxian thing that reminds me of. They both come back from these awful traumas and then have very similar sort of PTSD and reactions to them.
Yes.
Also on 392, we have the first of several times when Harcourt saves Lymond. Just pointing that out.
Yep.
Oh, and then we have that little chat with Adam and Lymond, where Adam says, you think we are lost, and Lyman says, perhaps there was a prophecy once. I think it is going to be fulfilled, and not before time. So what is Lyman thinking in that moment?
I think Lyman thinks he's gonna die. He's not gonna, the prophecy is gonna be fulfilled because he won't see his brother, because he's gonna die right now. And yeah.
Well, and I think it's really telling that he would have greatly preferred that outcome than the one where Richard isn't his brother.
Yeah.
And then also so Lyman is super, got to protect the Russian ambassador, so got to, do my part for the Tsar. But then the thing he cares about the most is Chancellor. Where is Chancellor? And he super intensely just does everything he could possibly do to save Chancellor.
Yeah, and he's trying to think about, okay, if Christopher fell off the boat unconscious, he's gonna float this direction, and so I gotta swim this way, and he's in the middle of the ocean, it's not gonna work. As you're reading it, it's not gonna work. But
I think it's also really interesting that Lymond, in all the previous books, Lymond is so competent. He's always ahead of the reader. He's always doing something amazing and accomplishing it. But in this book, he's doing things that the reader is what's wrong with you? You're wrong.
That's not going to work.
You're not going to be able to do this. Something has changed in I think the reader's relationship to him and in his relationship to reality. That he's lost that sense of perspective, or it's also just he doesn't care about living or dying. He'll do this on the 0.01% chance of saving Chancellor, because if he dies, he doesn't care.
Yeah. Can we pause for a second? I have to
go. So also then this is where we have the start of Lyman's point of view, which is obviously interesting because it's very rare. But we have Lyman's point of view in this really mechanical way of thinking that he's been in for this entire book. We finally get in his head and we see him thinking that way. So it's on the bottom of 397. Having calculated so far, nothing remained but to apply the physical laws relating to motion and force to deal with the blah, 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 about avoiding the reefs and all this stuff. And it's you're in a super dramatic rescue mission where you're about to die and you're thinking about calculating, the laws of motion and stuff. Yeah. It's just so, he's so removed from himself. He obviously has all the emotions because he cares so much about Chancellor, but he's not connecting with them the right way. And then here we have the death wish. What he wanted was very near. It was typical of the monstrous, egregious, laughable irony which dominated his life, that with every dragging lift of his arms, he should be saying over and over, not yet. It's damn it, I wanted to die this whole time, and now I'm about to die, and I don't want to die right now.
Right. Oh. Yeah.
And then we have DeHarcourt saving him again.
As you say, and then DeHarcourt saves him again.
He really tries to get him in that boat and to stay in that boat. Like when he jumps back off the boat later to go find Dickon again, it's like everything Harcourt can do to keep him on there.
Yeah, and then
Now he is trying to keep him alive, so I don't know if he was trying to kill him earlier or not. I'm still suspicious of him though.
Yeah, I don't know.
If it's not him, then it does implicate Danny. Oh no.
Yeah.
Or Adam. Yeah.
It's not Adam. It better not be.
It's not Adam. I'm fine with it being Danny.
Yeah.
Like,
I just think Danny was too obvious, but that doesn't mean it's not him.
She could be a red herring-ing her red herring.
Yeah.
So then it's on 400. We have Philippe, the part that you mentioned, the recurrence of that list, and it's so sad. And we have the large and fair white gerfalcon floating dead on the bay.
The 4 sables, which are what, kind of like ferrets or ermines?
They're a mammal with very thick, dark fur.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, I feel so bad for them all. Like, what a ridiculous thing to send them on this journey anyway, knowing how difficult survival would be. But this is things that really happened back then. Yeah. So then we're back in Lyman's point of view. So characteristic of an impervious and versatile engine, the not yet became with logic now. So he is logically like an engine deciding it's time to die. He is a mess. Sorry. But I think that explains the whole scene with Richard. Like, he's just a mess. He's not himself, even in the way that he was like a mess before, but he was functional and capable. He's just a mess. Like, he's really broken. And then he gets rescued by these like Scottish whatever they are, peasants. I don't know.
Let's try and take the rings off of his fingers.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm still alive. I hope he didn't hear me. Uh-oh.
Yeah, what? Yikes, do you hear me? Lyman, I kind of wondered a little bit if when Lyman says this, like, obviously his English is clearer than the men's English because of their class difference. But I kind of had a sneaking suspicion because Lyman's being kind of funny when he speaks up and says, I'm deaf in both ears. Like, in other words, I'm not going to turn you in. I didn't hear you. I wonder if he says it in a slightly thicker accent, like if he's connecting with those men a little bit more.
I think he talks a little bit in Scottish vernacular at some point. I forget exactly where, but there was something he said that was like, he's clearly tailoring
the
conversation
the message. Like, hey, I'm one of you.
Well, and he's getting, I mean, he negotiates for them to save Chancellor based on his name as a coulter, so he has to be Scottish now.
For sure.
So then I also super love how when he does get pulled up to the shore and the men are like, who's going to lead us now? And like, oh, the Vovoda. It's Adam who intervenes and is like, yes, but for the mercy of God, not just now. Like, he knows Lyman needs some time.
He just like give the poor man a break.
And Adam is so sensitive. He's really, he wins us over.
Yeah.
And then we have that ending bit with Chancellor echoing the like the bodies that we saw before in the funeral for the guy that was killed in the sled race, with the
sun and
the morning sun and the shoes, for he had a long way to go.
Yeah, I did love the line about his long studied seas with dignity gave him his fire. You know, that he died in the place that he'd given his life to study, kind of thing.
Yeah, and he, like, his body goes out through the path he had discovered. Like his final journey of his final journey is through the way that his life like led to the sort of navigation of.
Yeah.
Like, obviously it's very sad, but I think she describes it just so beautifully and poetically. And she, like, you know, I never heard of this guy, but she makes this guy's life seem even though it was brief, even though it was cut short, that he was this amazing person that you know, made a huge difference in human knowledge.
I wonder if he's more of a popular historical figure in England, like if it's something that they would learn about.
I think he's pretty obscure. Like, there's a bunch of other navigators that you learn more about. But
Like
interesting. What?
Like Cook and
yeah, I think because his life was cut short early. Interestingly, I'll share this now. Someone just posted this on the Dunnett Society Facebook page, actually. This is not fan art. This is real art. Not that fan art isn't real. Of Chancellor's death by Severino Beraldi. So he's, I guess, famous enough that people are doing art of him, but he's still pretty obscure.
Okay, chapter 3. So we kind of get the news of the wreck getting disseminated and the view of the men after the wreck. Then we have this scene with Richard. And then we sort of have a bit at the end where they decide to go south. So that is chapter 3. Yeah, it's such a sad moment, I think, with the scene with Philippa, where it's like there's Lyman is back, and so she's like to write his mother, and then they find out that Christopher and Dickon have died. Oh. It's like, who's gonna tell the Sydneys?
I know. And Philippa does, because she's awesome.
Yeah. And she fakes a fever. I do love that, like, the queen won't let her go, so she fakes being sick so that she can go to the Sydneys and tell them.
I love how Philippa has no, like, restrictions in terms of propriety. She's just gonna do what she's gonna do. She's gonna do the right thing, but, like, she's not gonna follow the laws of society or whatever.
Yeah. Also, we get a slight view of, like, her. She's been reading Bartholomew Lynchpole's correspondence for weeks. So I do love that. Like, she's kind of like, oh, all this stuff directed to Crawford should come to me and I will read it. And
I'm his wife, after all.
Yep, and be apprised of what is going on. So
no barriers to Philippa finding out what's going on.
Yep.
So then I think it's also interesting that we get, like, confirmation of what we had assumed, but it was never explicit before. One of the first to hear it about the shipwreck is Richard. The first to hear it was the man for whose sake, because of a prophecy, Francis Crawford was committed to his deliberate and industrious exile. Mm-hmm. So the idea that, like, the reason he went away to begin with was he couldn't stand the thought that Richard could die because of him coming back. Mm-hmm. Which is just so typical of Lyman, to do something awful to Richard for Richard's own good. Also, the way was she on, by the way. There are so many parallels.
So many parallels. Everybody watch The Untamed.
Do it. I like how we get Sibylla hearing the news and immediately fainting for the first time in her life. Yeah. But then Kate is right there with her to sort of see her through it. And they're both, I would think, relieved that he's back. But I don't know.
Yeah. I imagine they're relieved, but then, like, they probably also have the same thing that Richard has, the turmoil in body, because, like, it's Lyman, so there's going to be trouble.
Yeah. When isn't there with him?
Yeah, I mean, there's the complications, right? It's like relieved with complications.
Lyman will always bring the complications. Yeah. So then also Lyman has written this letter and signed it, you know, extravagantly with his name and titles. And there's a couple bits about how deliberate and how, like, hard that was for Lyman. Like, he super didn't want to do that. he doesn't want to be claiming his Scottish identity. He wants to be claiming his Russian identity, but he's now the only person that can like advocate for Nepeja and help the Russian stuff. So he's doing this for Russia, not for Scotland, but he has to like claim his Scottish identity to do it. And he's like not happy about that, but he's going to do it. He's going to do what he has to do.
Yeah. And there's a sentence / paragraph right after that just again embodies one of the things I love about Dunnett's sentence construction. And I do geek out a little bit about her like syntax, but on 407, there's this paragraph that starts out, nor comma. So the sentence is actually, the meat of the sentence is, nor did the third Baron Coulter dream of the degree of cold considered thought which had forced the dispatch of that letter. That's the meat of the sentence. But there's this entire descriptive part in between the nor and the did that is just delightful. And it's just such a great example of how she like puts the punch of the sentence at the end while also including a whole bunch of other things. And I like it.
And one of the things that's just funny about her is like, this is like so not the recommended way to write a sentence. And most of the time when you're like beta reading or editing someone's work, you're going to be like, okay, you need to break up this paragraph. But she's so good that it works.
It's also old-fashioned, which I love. Like this is she writes in a very like old-fashioned writing style in this. I don't know if I exactly want to say that because she is quite modern in a lot of the things that she does. But these sentences like this are historically very common. But in modern writing, we don't write like that. And we teach people not to write like that because it's often too confusing. And to be able to write sentences like that well, you have to be super skilled. And so most of the time we just don't teach people to do it because they're not good enough. And
it's one of those very common things where like you learn the rules, and once you know the rules really well and you're like a master, then you can break the rules with mastery and really excel. But most people are just going to write a convoluted like run-on paragraph, and it's not going to be as good if they,
Yeah, but this is an example of her, like, I think she's not breaking the rules, obviously, everything's grammatically correct here, but she's using a style. I think it just speaks to how much she read historical works, because she's really incorporated this historical style in this story about a historical character. So it's like we're kind of pulled into this long sentences in ways that would have also happened back then. There would have been like these incredibly long sentences, which
I imagine this comes naturally to her because she's so immersed in that kind of writing. And yes, she's not breaking any of the literal rules of English grammar, but she's breaking like all the rules of like a publishing house when their editor's going to edit your work.
Yeah.
At least nowadays, and probably.
Yeah, I don't know what the 60s were like, but yeah, today publishers would not be happy.
Yeah, I have a friend who's an editor. I've been trying to get her to read it, and she every time she tries, she's like, so then should we talk about the scene with Richard?
Yeah, I think that's what we've got next.
One of the things I really, really love is the landscape descriptions. There's so many of them in this, and they're all gray and cold, and the water's sort of swirling and it's stressful, and just how the pale sky, the rain wet beach, everything is like backing up this melancholy turmoil that we get in the conversation. And it's also so Scotland, like you just feel like, okay, I am on the coast of Scotland. Mm-hmm. Everything in this feels like Scotland.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And this whole scene with Richard like walking towards Lyman, you feel that prophecy tension, and it's like, are they gonna see each other? Like, are they gonna, like what is gonna happen? And it's just a very skillful sort of rising tension until we get to the bottom of 411, where we get this sentence where it says, Lyman did not move, his head lifted, watching, showed no conventional welcome. His brows cloudily drawn suggested the weight of something so firmly extinguished that nothing was left in thought or expression save a curious air, part of resignation, part of defiance, which had to do perhaps with his stillness. And so it's like,
Well, and he's like, you know, like we have the turmoil in the sea, and we have the turmoil that Richard is dreading his brother's going to bring, and then we know this turmoil in Lymond, like having this moment means, oh, thank God Richard's not going to die, that I'm here, but Richard's not my brother. And that and what does that mean for me? What does that mean for Sibylla? Like, you know, he's still emphatic here. He's not going to see Sibylla because seeing Richard just confirms that there's something fishy that she's not telling him.
Yeah.
And he doesn't, like, he so doesn't want to know.
Yeah.
But he's gonna find out.
Yep.
So I also like the line, "You cannot embrace a seated man whose long, sleek hands, broken with calluses, remain strictly clasped around his knees." And he's so like contained in himself, and you know, like a porcupine with quills sticking out, like, don't touch me. Like he's so like I have a lot of like, yeah, he's really annoying in this scene, but I have a lot of sympathy. He's so broken and he so can't, like, I'm sure there's a part of him that would just love to get a hug from his brother, but like he thinks he's a monster, and it's the same thing that happens in Untamed. He comes back thinking he's a monster, and that, you know, he doesn't deserve the comfort of anyone else, so he pushes them away and he's horrible to them. But it's because what's going on underneath is so sad.
I still want to slap him, but I get it.
You're not the only one who wants to slap him.
I just want to drag him to therapy.
Only they had therapy.
Just once. One slap is all.
So speaking of how the landscape is, you know, directly reflecting what's happening with the characters, we have Richard. He had picked it up before he had found it was fractured, an eggshell guillotined by its fellows to show a quartz yolk of glistening olive to this like broken rock representing this broken brother that he's discovered.
I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure if I have anything else specific to say about this scene, just because it's sad. It's like Richard's trying to catch up with him, and Lyman, of course, has all this inner turmoil that he's not expressing. And, you know, Richard wants him to be like, it's so good to see you again, you know, and of course he's not doing that. And
well, there's so much subtext in what they talk about. So Lyman, he's kind of he's kind of like dismissive about the people who've died and about Chancellor. At least we don't have to bury them, he says. And this is like the exact behavior that he would give in the earlier books, to push people away, you know, like saying something awful to hide how much he cares. And even like Richard sees that the edge suddenly was back with all the hurtfulness he remembered so well. And like you said, like Richard can't see through this. If it was Sibylla, she'd see right through this, and she'd be like, "Oh, honey, you need a hug." But Richard's like, "Why is he being such a jerk?"
Yeah. And like Richard just doesn't understand, like, why are you so cold about Philippa? Why don't you want to see your son? Why don't you want to, you know? And it's just,
So Richard says, "I hear you killed Graham Mallet." Lymond opened his lips before he spoke. Eventually, he said. This is where we're like slowly getting close to the heart of what's wrong. Like, in order to kill Graham Mallet, I had to kill my own son. Like, I'm a monster. You don't want to know me. Stay away from me. I can't even deal with this. Like, don't make me acknowledge what happened, you know? And he alludes to the child. The child who died. I mean, he doesn't allude. He talks about the child who dies. He alludes to the fact that the child who died was his son when he says egg mimicry. Egg mimicry is when like a bird puts its egg into another bird's nest, and that other bird like ends up raising it thinking it's theirs.
Yeah.
So the implication that Kuzum isn't his son. And like Richard, of course, has no idea. He's like, why don't you want to see your son? And Lyman can't say like, that's not my son. That's Gabriel's son. I killed my son. You know, he can't say it. Right after he says that, he's delving his long, ruined fingers through the sand of the beach, scattered with immaculate shells. And you remember the little boy playing with the shells and how the last exchange they had was about your shells are waiting for you. You can play with them when it's over.
And of course, Richard jumps in with, I've got 3 kids.
Yeah, Lyman asked.
Yeah, how many of your eggs have hatched?
Yeah. But,
on the plus side, there is a little bit of humor when Lyman says, since Moscow is in the same planet as Philippa, I know how my son is.
But he doesn't quite know how the divorce went, because even though they're on the same planet, they're not that close. So, yeah. And it is interesting. I loved this bit of just an example of like European, like how politics screws with everybody, about how Lyman's divorce isn't going through because there's this like random Pope King of France conflict that's mucking up the works. And it's like, okay.
We also have this whole thing about there's a plot against Queen Mary, but it was betrayed to rob the treasury and establish Elizabeth as queen, married to Edward Courtenay. And then that Courtenay is dead. He was the only male claimant to the throne, which like certainly the first time I read this, I was like, I don't care why you're talking about this, but it comes back later. That's why.
Okay.
Spoilers.
Just remember that they talked about that. No, because it comes back later and I'm like, who? What? I was too busy thinking about the egg mimicry thing. Yeah. I don't care about Edward Courtenay.
Who he was, I don't care actually.
He was a male claimant to the throne. He had a conspiracy to overthrow Mary and he died. Okay. I do love also when Lymond is being Lymond and Richard says, why do you do that? You know we believe Philippa.
Yeah.
It's just like, I love that his brother can call him on his ridiculousness. Yeah. Even though he's like, come on, Richard, you know by now why he does it. It's not malice, it's drama.
Yeah, I underline that as well. It's just like, you can just hear the older brother tone of voice in that. Like, why do you keep doing this? Yeah.
I think it's really interesting because we've seen Lyman as this vovoda, you know, and all from these men looking up at him. Everyone's looking up at him, like, what's with that guy? And then Richard is not looking up at him. Richard's like, oh God, it's my ridiculous brother again. You know, we just get this completely different view.
Yeah. I wondered what you guys thought about. So he's talking, Lyman's like lying to Richard about Gazelle and like sort of giving him this impression, like we hope to have 4 children legitimized. He's kidding, obviously. And so it says, for a moment with a sinking heart, Richard believed him. And then he saw the look on Lyman's face and found he could bear it even less. So it's like, at first he's sad because he thinks it's true. And then he realizes that Lyman's joking. And then he thinks it's like, that's worse because he's joking about this. But then he says, at least you're back. And if he'd been looking at his brother's face then, which he was not, he would have seen worn into the bones a burden identical to his own, which rested a moment and then was as swiftly banished. And so I was wondering, when I talked about this burden that's identical between Richard and Lyman, is it the burden of like Richard's burden as the Baron of Coulter? So he has people who depend on him. He has responsibilities. He has all of this, like he has to be successful or else people suffer. Like, is that the identical burden? Or is there something else? Like, what is this identical burden? Because I generally don't think of the two of them as having similar struggles.
I took it as not the same exact burden, but the more the impact of the burden they're each carrying on their like their demeanor and their face, rather than that it's like literally the specific same thing. It's more like Lyman has been acting all like, I don't really care and I'm a jerk, you know, and
actually overwhelmed with this.
Yeah, and I feel like this moment where his facade drops and it's like what we know is really going on. He's deeply in mourning and he's terrified about what's going to happen. And he's really wanting to just like stay away from his family because he's so worried about, all the she's not really my mother and all those stuff. I think that it's like the tragedy of this conversation where they're both so hurt and they both so like need each other and need comfort, but like the fact that Richard doesn't see that look on Lyman's face, like Richard, it's just Richard doesn't see how much his brother like needs a hug and is putting on a facade to protect himself. So yeah, I just took it as that, like Richard missing what's really going on with Lymond, and that Lymond is struggling as much as he is, and that they really, if only they'd been able to connect, they could have come together and comfort each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's literally a parallel bird.
No. I think
yeah, that's perfectly sensible reading of it, I think. I don't know what else it could be. So.
And then we just get this sad bit where Lyman's trying to explain what happened and like that it's a different, like everything has changed him so much, and then he tries to explain like, I don't want to see this kid, it's not.
He flat out says, do you know how he was saved? And then on the next page he says, do you know how the other one died? Like, he's not going to say something like that to anyone but a dear close family member. So it's like he's trying, like there's a part of him that does want that connection and to talk about it and go to therapy, but like Richard's not going to pick up on it.
No. And then at the end, I just want to, like, talk about slapping people. I just want to slap Richard, where it says like, if you've made your bed well may you lie on it, Lyman said. The Buchan version is even after, Richard, I'm not worth anyone's heartache. I know that, Richard said, but she does not. She will have to learn. And I'm like, Richard! It's just, oh! Like, you're definitely worth people's heartache.
I don't think he actually feels that way. I think he's just frustrated in this moment.
Yeah, and I think you're right.
Yeah. But I think that's part of why I want to slap Richard, is because it doesn't matter if he feels it or not. He said it. And it's like, what you say matters. And even if you don't mean what you say, it still matters. So
yeah, I mean,
don't be a dick to your brother.
He's acting the way Lyman is acting. Lyman, sets the standard of saying the opposite of what you mean, and then Richard ends up doing the same thing.
He's just matching the energy he's being given.
So I think also this like broiling underlying turmoil in the sea and whatever, and like what's going on with Lyman and Richard, we get a number of hints of what also is going on with Lyman in this. There's like 3 references in these 2 pages themselves about them not being related. Lyman says, and listen to me as if I weren't related. And he says, you rode for a brother who doesn't exist. And then Richard was staring at him as if indeed they were not related. So even though they don't actually talk about that, this is what's going on, I think, underneath with Lyman, is this, oh my God, he's not my brother, because here we are talking and defies the prophecy.
I mean, half brothers are still brothers, though.
No.
Like, unless they're completely 2 different sets of parents, which I don't believe for a second.
Yeah, I don't know what Lyman actually thinks the parentage is right now.
Yeah.
I honestly can't keep track because it changes all the time.
I don't know.
But he obviously is upset by it.
Well, sure.
Maybe what he's thinking is that he and Richard are connected through their father, which he doesn't want because he doesn't see his father as his real parent or something. I don't know. But
the specific prophecy was your father's 2 sons will never meet again.
Oh, that's right.
So it can't be the father. The prophecy doesn't say anything about brothers. It says your father's 2 sons will never meet again.
Right.
So then it means that what he's thinking is that Sibylla cheated on Gavin.
Right.
And that therefore, like, Sibylla's bad, and that's part of why he doesn't want to see her.
I guess. I don't know. I feel like there's some cultural weight to this dilemma that we just don't understand because it's not. It's
not a thing. Yeah, I agree. It's like the prophecy stuff to me because I don't believe in any way in like fate and prophecies, but like Lyman takes it very seriously, so I have to be like, all right, it's real to him, so I need to take it seriously. But like, it's also sort of like,
Yeah.
Any other thoughts? I covered all of my notes, but any other thoughts on their conversation?
Nope. That's what I
mean, it's what I wanted. I wanted them to meet again and have a conversation, but it's not at all what I wanted. So
not a satisfying conversation.
I hope that there is a future conversation that's a lot better. Please. And I mean, this is getting into what we want to see next, but I really want to see the Lyman Sibylla confrontation too, because I feel at this point it's going to be a confrontation. Unless Lyman learns more about his parentage.
Maybe. I don't know.
Anyway.
I don't know. So then they head out. So the guy, and it's basically, this next bit is kind of the men talking about Lyman. I do like this line where Harcourt says, "Do you think he's enjoyed the reunion?" And Danny has left even more critically. "Do you think either of them has enjoyed the reunion? I know that smile cooled in snake blood."
I also love Danny's quip right before that after he meets Richard. So that nice man is Belial's family. I don't know if I pronounce that right, but it's like a demon or the devil.
Yeah. So they are riding out.
And then Adam and Lyman talk about the prophecy. And Adam, like, he's so observant. He's like, he guesses what the prophecy was, but he guesses the opposite.
Right. Yeah. And just that Lyman with infinite calmness. I'm rather afraid that it did come true. So I think what Lyman is afraid of now is that the prophecy is true and not false, because he's seen his brother. So if the prophecy is true, then his brother isn't his brother.
Well, and then it's very telling that at the end, the men are playing music and Lyman rides away, so he doesn't have to hear it because he can't tolerate music now.
Yeah.
So, I mean, obviously metaphorical for he's functioning like this machine. He's completely out of touch with his emotions. They're wrecking him inside. He's passively suicidal, at least. But like in the thing with Richard, the music, these things are trying to bring out the emotions, but he can't like process and deal. So, sorry I made you guys read this. Thoughts on what you want to happen next or anything else?
Dealing with his emotions would be good. Like some sort of coming to terms with things would be nice. Having a conversation with someone about his pain. Like, I feel like the only person that he could really have a conversation with about this is Philippa, because she was there. And so, will that happen?
How would Philippa, because she doesn't know that it's not his son, so it would be hard to have that conversation with her.
I mean, there's a part of me that says so, like, have the hard conversation. Like, I think that's part of the problem, is that Lyman is not willing to have hard conversations. Like, he avoids them. If there's a conversation about emotion that's painful, he doesn't want to have it. And
he's protecting other people.
Like, but that's just, I don't care. I don't care what his motivation is. He's not willing to have the hard conversation. And I think it's a little bit, I think perhaps he's telling people that he's protecting them, and maybe he is to some extent, but in the midst of protecting other people, he's also protecting himself. And yeah, you just can't go through life like that and be a healthy adult person. So,
well, yeah, I think we could all agree that Lyman is not a healthy adult person.
And have the hard conversations that he doesn't want to have with many people. And
yeah, well, and he's in the perfect
going
spot.
to Russia to avoid them.
He's in the place to have these conversations now that he's back at home. And that's what I want to see. I want to see his reunite. That's not a word. I want to see how he reunites with his family members other than Richard, with Philippa, with Kate. Like, what's going to happen when Mary Lennox and him come face to face? Margaret Lennox, sorry. Mary Lennox is from Secret Garden. This is not the first time I've made that mistake.
Yeah. I will see. I'm skeptical that he's going to do anything. Like, like I said, like, I have lost patience with this character over these books. Like, I feel like he has not grown. Like, it's like we have been with this character for 4.5 books, and I feel like he has not grown. Like, he's grown in a few things, but in terms of his ability to deal with pain, he has not grown. And it's just driving me crazy. So yeah.
I think he grew to a certain point, and then this Gabriel freight train hit him and sent him off the rails, and now he grew like the wrong way, and so we're kind of like wanting him to get back on the rails and then continue forward again.
Yeah. I mean, maybe the post Tatty Boy, maybe there was like a moment like in between the Tatty Boy nonsense and Gabriel. Like, there was that like brief bit of book in between those where maybe something was happening. But
I mean, I think he learned a lot from the experience with the Liam Rowe about not withdrawing from the world and trying to make the world better. And then he applied that in Scotland with St. Mary's and was genuinely helping the Scottish people. And then that's where Gabriel came in like a freight train and sent him off the rails with like, by the way, I kidnapped your kid.
Yeah. Yeah, it just, I don't know. I guess I've been asking for these conversations to happen for 5.5 books. And so I feel like I've been asking for the exact same thing for 5.5 books. And I don't know if that's actually true, but it feels true. And yeah. So, and I think what you said earlier was right about reading it this way is making it kind of torturous. Like, just because like we've been living with this version of Lyman since like January or something like that. Like, I don't know how long it's been, but it's been a very long time.
Yeah.
And I think you're absolutely right. If I had been reading this on my own, like I would have read the whole series in like 5 days or something, or, a week. So I think you are right that it's making it much more difficult to read it this way.
Yeah, I definitely just like powered through it in a week, and I didn't like this book much. The first few times, I'm actually enjoying it more now, but I think it's because I already know everything that's going to happen, so I'm not like stressed by it. But yeah, I mean, it's just so much easier to read it in a day and then move on.
Yeah. Because I just feel like I sit with like this sadness just over and over. I spend a week sitting with sadness in these characters, and then the next week comes and we read 3 more chapters and I sit with sadness again for another week, and then we read 3 more chapters and I sit with sadness again for another week, and I just feel like that's on like lather, rinse, repeat forever.
You know what we're gonna need to do is we're gonna need to read it faster.
If only we were still in the summer, we could record a video like every 2 days. Like, that would be the best way to do it. But we just,
summer's coming soon.
That's true.
Yeah, it's almost May. It is May. It's almost
Well,
June.
we have the longest book to come, so right?
We do, yeah. Checkmate is really freaking long.
Okay.
But don't worry, it'll be fine. you know, I don't want to spoil you guys, but I promise it's worth hanging in there. I promise.
Okay.
Got our fingers crossed.
On that note, any final thoughts?
Yeah,
I think so.
I just want him to
Happier times will come,
have some
and I'm looking forward to them. So,
yeah.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for watching and commenting.
Yeah. Bye.